and welcome to your next session, I guess, for 6005, where today we're going to be talking about distilling your message. So what exactly are we going to be talking about today? What does that mean? So we're going to be talking about how you actually distill your message. Like, how do you know what's pertinent to an audience? How do you know what facts to pick and what not to use? And then I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to try and think about how you can actually go about this. So, ideally, this is how you want your audience. Someone just on the edge of your seat, listening to every word. I'm sure if I could see all of your faces, you'd be looking like this right now. Unfortunately, most of the audiences we talk to are a little bit more like this. Why should I care? It doesn't have anything to do with me. Why do you want to tell me about science? Why should I care about this new shiny thing? Why do I want a machine that goes ping? The so what is really important. And trying to identify that so what that is going to work for the audience that you're trying to engage, it's actually a lot harder than you might think. So this is what we're going to talk about in a little bit of detail now. How do you actually start to think about what's going to engage your audience? Now, you're probably sick of hearing this by now because you've probably heard it in every single class that you've ever done in this grad cert. First one is know your audience, that old chestnut. So it really does come down to who are you talking to? Who is the main group that you're talking to? What are they interested in? What are their values? What are their beliefs? What is kind of the defining characteristic of this community? What kind of hook or angle can you use to demonstrate that your thing, your message, is relevant to them? Sometimes it might be a little bit of a long bow to draw. That they've discovered that Ceres is actually a water planet. What does that actually have to do if you're living in the inner North Shore? Yeah, I don't know. So then you have to go a little bit deeper. Think about what we look at in the media. Those things are all newsworthy. People will listen to it, even if it doesn't have that immediate relevance to them. So how do you decide if something's newsworthy or not? You can use what journalists use, which are the news values. So these are used to identify characteristics of stories, which journalists can then use to determine if it's going to be relevant and of interest to their audiences, their readers, their listeners. You can use these same ones as well. Now, there are lots of lists of news values out there. Some of them will use more words, different words, but they're all asking you the same thing. So what are these news values? First one is impact. Is it a big deal? So is it a big thing that's going to affect a few people? So for example, that could be things like a very large bus crash or a plane crash or buildings exploding in Lebanon? Or is it a small thing which is going to affect a lot of people? And that can be things like interest rate rises, the reduction or cancellation of job seeker payments, all of those kinds of things. So you want to start to think about how big a deal is this and who is it going to impact? Second one is timeliness. And if it's not new, then it's not news. You don't really want to be hearing about information that's really, really old, unless it's a new development on an old story. So for example, the hunt for MH370, anything to do with COVID, the search for missing children, Merryn McKinnon, that's a story that's been going for years. New information comes to light, and so it becomes more relevant and becomes of interest. It's a running story then. So otherwise, if it's not part of a running story, if it's the shiny new thing, then it's timely. Now, I was both gratified and horrified to realise that a lot of what I'm about to tell you can actually be represented in a comic strip. So I am going to use Calvin and Hobbes to get some of this across. So the next one is proximity. Local news, or news that is local to you, and we'll talk about what local means, makes it newsworthy. So if something's happening in your backyard, and that backyard can literally be in your town, in your city, in your country, or maybe in your whole region. So proximity makes the story relevant. So you want to know what's happening right near you. Famous people are also very good to help make your story more newsworthy. Can be famous places as well, can be famous things. But if you think about who the main people are at any given time in the headlines, guarantee you're going to find Trump in there because he's infamous and notorious for saying odd things at odd times. But anything to do with a famous person or a prominent figure, That can help you get your message across. The other thing which you can use is a pop culture reference. So this is one from the ANU from a few years ago now, but it still demonstrates it really well. So this was at the peak of the Game of Thrones phenomenon, where everyone was hanging out for the last book. Everyone's given up hope now, but the TV series was about to finish. Game of Thrones was huge. ANU researchers, or ANU media, picked up some research on fiddler crabs. Now, I think fiddler crabs are cool. I appreciate that not everyone has that same viewpoint. But instead of saying new fiddler crab research, they likened it to Game of Thrones and the struggles to control territory and to get people on your side and to control domains and generally rule. So they used the Game of Thrones kind of concept to lure people in to research about fiddler crabs. So that made it a little bit more sexy, I suppose. Currency, not talking about money. Is it relevant to a current issue? Is it something that is happening right here, right now? So if it is relevant to current issues, even if that's a little bit of a stretch, it's still a connection that you can make to start to build that newsworthiness. Conflict and tension, and this is a big one. So there's an old editor's maxim, if it bleeds, it leads. And it doesn't matter if you have the best scientific story in the world. If there is something that, a building explosion or a big accident or some other kind of calamity, then that is what is going to get the headlines. And I mean, next time you go to the supermarket, have a look at the magazines that are right near the checkout. You will see that all of those headlines are going to be about who's divorcing who's fighting who, betrayal, all of those things. Anything to do with political reporting, you will also start to see a lot of conflict and tension. Do want to be careful with this one though, with some of your scientific issues, particularly if you are talking about something that might be a little bit controversial. Sometimes that conflict can be hinted at or made up. So just be very, very careful while you are thinking about how you're going to talk to people about particular topics. Novelty, something new and unusual. This is typically the descriptors that you have, sort of like the est words, the biggest, the fastest, the smallest, the newest, the furthest, the highest, any of those kinds of descriptions that apply to something that is new and unusual. Again, you have to be careful, just a little bit careful with the use of novelty when you're talking about science. So probably about 5 or 6 years ago now, I remember news headlines coming out of Europe, I believe, where researchers had managed to grow a human ear on the back of a rat. Great visuals, disturbing visuals, a little bit too high on the novelty, because then you're starting to get into Frankenstein, people playing God, creating things which really shouldn't be created. So again, novelty is a really good one to use, particularly if you're talking about new things, but you just need to make sure that that novelty is balanced so you can keep control of the message that you want to get across. The last one is human interest or emotional appeal. And we're humans. We are hardwired to tell each other stories, to listen to stories, to enjoy stories. So particularly if you are talking about a scientific topic, put people into it. So this could be a story about the researcher, their motivation for doing the work that they do, or what would this research mean to the people it's going to influence? Is it a new medication? Is it reducing inequality? Is it going to put people on Mars? So these are the kinds of stories that can help bring science from something very technical, theoretical, cold, sterile, and to actually make it sort of squishy and with feelings and have that human interrelationships and just make it come to life a little bit more. So whenever journalists are looking at what news stories to cover, they are looking for stories and messages that tick off as many of these news values as they possibly can. You can do the same thing. When you are thinking about what to tell people, think about these news values. How many apply to the audience that you are trying to reach? But the trick is you have to do it quickly. So if you manage to get a quote in the media, if you manage to get, 15 seconds, you're doing really well. You need to be able to get to the point quickly and easily. It's the same if you're putting a headline on social media. You've got about 8 words. Eyeballs move quickly, you need images, People aren't going to stop and read War and Peace to find out what you need. So this is a very common example that's given. And it always gives me a flashback to, there was a day when I was doing my grad dip and I was given a 6-hour lecture on the importance of being brief. It's the irony that stays with me. But this was one of the examples, and it's effective and it works. So imagine that you are starting up a beachside fish and chip shop. You have a certain budget for your sign. So you go and talk to the sign maker and you say, I want a sign, it's going to be beautiful. I want it to say fresh fish, sold here today. And the sign maker says, sure, that's going to cost you, and quotes you a price that's about 18 times your actual budget. Okay, so how can I afford this? Well, what are you selling tomorrow? Fish. What are you selling the day after that? Fish. You can probably get rid of that one then. Okay. Are you going to sell it anywhere else other than here? No. Cool. Get rid of that one. Are you going to barter, exchange it for magic beans, give it away, or is it always going to be sold? It's always going to be sold. I want money. Right. You're going to sell old fish, stinky fish, off fish? No. Okay then. This is your sign, and that's actually the one that you can afford. But when you think about the bigger context, you're right next to the ocean. Of course it's going to be fresh. It's a shop. Of course it's going to be sold. The shop isn't on wheels. Of course it's going to be here. So it's about paring away all of those irrelevant, meaningless words that don't necessarily add anything to what you're trying to say, and just getting down to what matters. So, take-home messages. Know your audience. Know who you are talking to, and you use that information to tailor your key message to make it as relevant to their interests, their geographic location, their values, their beliefs, as you possibly can. And you also want to make sure that you keep it short. You want this to be a gateway drug. You want it to be the start of a conversation. Tell them enough to get their interest and get them to ask questions. So eventually, they really will look at you like this and want to hear a lot more. So good luck and happy distilling.
Thank you very much, Merryn. So I'm feeling bad right now because what I am going to endeavour to do is ask very short questions.
Good. I'll give very short answers.
Well, you've inspired me. Distilling your message, I feel that as you ask questions, you should also ask the shortest one possible. So why don't scientists always get it?
Curse of knowledge. We feel like we have all of this information, and if people would truly just understand this information, then they'd see how relevant, how interesting, how important, how cool this thing is. So we tend to compensate by saying all of the things rather than just by focusing on what's important, just enough to get people interested.
Why do so many scientists feel like their story is newsworthy? Why is that one a tricky one to get across to people?
I don't even know if it's just scientists, to be fair.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of people, she said, demonstrating it really well, when they're asked questions, they're not necessarily coming with a pre-prepared script.
Yeah.
And so when you're giving that information, you're sort of doing that mental sort through at the same time. And unless you have really thought about what you want to say, and unless you have really clearly thought about the key message that you want to get across, you tend to talk around it a little bit until you actually hone in on precisely what you want to
what it
say.
is you want to do. Yeah, look, and I'm going to let us both off the hook here. We can be a little bit more loquacious. We can expand a little bit here. We don't have to distill our message for both question and answer every time here.
It's tiring.
Oh, absolutely it is. It really, you get so much more space to relax when you have all of those other verbs to allow you to slow down. But I find it fascinating, when you talk about the news values there. And of course they make sense because we all read news sites. I was going to say newspapers, but no one reads newspapers anymore. We all watch the news regularly. We all see what happens on social media. And yet, when it comes to our own stuff, we go, yeah, but this is new. This is exciting. Surely this is exciting. And then you reach out to an editor and they say, yeah, no, mate, that's fine. Don't worry about that. That's good.
Yeah.
Why is it we don't get it about our own stuff when we can see it in other people's? We can see other people's stuff and we can say, yeah, look, this is newsworthy. That's not so newsworthy.
Probably because we're too close to it. And I think for a lot of us, we're working on like passion projects or things that really engage us, really interest us. It's probably a little bit like people wanting to talk about their children or their pets. Like other people's are nice, they're interesting.
Yeah.
They're not as good as yours.
Yeah. But deep down, realizing that your children are interesting to you, but deeply uninteresting to other people.
Absolutely.
Like deep down, who cares?
Yeah, I'd be appalled if all the other parents were talking about my child.
Okay, yeah, and there probably are children that are interesting, but indeed, you don't want to have...
Interesting, yeah.
Yeah, indeed. So, yeah, fair enough. I get that. And I think there is that moment of recognition, surely, in all of this, that yes, your children are interesting to you, but they only become interesting to other people for certain things that are in the news cycle, not for the things that they're of interest to you.
Exactly, and that's why it's about knowing your audience. It's about what they're going to find interesting, not what you find interesting. So, if you get a platform and you can wax lyrical about whatever you like, but ultimately you need to have people on board and wanting to hear what you have to say. So their needs, their interests and their concerns, that has to be your very first step of, okay, what do I start talking about? And then you let their interest and their questions guide where you go next.
Yeah.
But it's all about them. It's not about you.
So you use the phrase "so what" a lot, and every time when you're doing workshops with me, you're often stressing to people what we need to get to is the so what. What does that mean to you? I mean, I know it means so what, but give me more. Give me more, a longer definition of what so what means to you.
It's probably like the unspoken half of that question was, so what? Why should I care?
Yeah.
And that, I think, for me, that underpins so many barriers and problems and issues that we're having globally. Getting people to want to take action against, climate change or inequalities or social distancing, wearing a mask, all of that stuff. Like, why should I care?
Yeah.
Like it's about finding that point of relevance that's actually going to make someone pause and listen and actually want to engage and take in what you're saying.
It feels so, every time I think through this, it feels so rude. Not you. I mean, this is when I do it myself or I talk to others. It feels so rude to let people know no one cares.
Yeah.
No one cares, 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 no one cares. And that feels like, oh, that's a bit mean and brutal.
Yeah.
But I think we as science communicators have to get past that, don't we?
Absolutely. And look, there is some research that you can put lipstick on it all you want, but it's only going to be interesting to a very niche audience. Now, that's the wonderful thing about social media and everything we have online. Those niche audiences are out there. You can always find a place for a story that you want to tell. But if you want to go for mass engagement, then you have to start thinking about something less niche and thinking, how is it going to appeal to that broader audience?
I guess some research, no one will ever care, or it'll only ever be niche. But what do you think are the key things for getting people to care about different bits of research?
Humans are really self-interested. Like if it's something that's going to influence their lives, for better or for worse, then they're going to want to hear about it. If it's going to have ramifications for how much something might cost or the availability of things, they're going to want to hear about it. That doesn't make us sound like very nice as a species, does it? But I think there's also some of that, a lot of the blue sky research, just the exploration for exploration's sake. Like there is so much about the world that we don't know. And exploring the unknown and finding new things is also, it's just cool. And it can also be, what's the word? Inspirational.
But this is the thing. I mean, if we say on one side it's all about self-interest, but then we go, but black holes float. you know, and you get pictures of nebula and stuff like that. There's no self-interest there, but that clearly gets a good run in newspapers. So what is that? What is the other side of that? If it's self-interest on one side, what is the other side that gets the so what there?
Wonder, aspiration, sort of that sense of, cool, we can do that. Oh, wow, look at that, that's weird. And it's also, I think, I don't know, maybe there's sort of this little fascination. Are we alone in the universe? Like, is there someone else out there? The little green men?
When do you think scientists should start thinking about the so what of their research?
Well, I mean, realistically, it depends on the scientist. If you're going for a grant in order to actually do that research, the so what comes immediately in that application. Like, if you can't convince people with money this is going to have benefit because of X, Y, and Z, then that's the first so what. And then beyond that, I think, you know, if you are receiving public money, for example, then you should be able to explain to people at every step of it, you know, this is what we're doing, this is why, and this is why it matters. And sometimes it really is simply because, you know, because we don't know anything about it. Like, we know more about space, for example, than we know about the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, bottom of the ocean's hard. It's dark.
It's hard.
You can't see anything down
But it's
there.
a great story, though, because you've got all of these curious creatures and you've got people overcoming great odds and new technology and figuring out problem solving, figuring out a way. Like, it has that great story arc. You know, I want to do a thing. It's so hard. No one can do it. But I've got an idea. I'm going to try. It's been really difficult. All of these barriers. Oh, my God, I succeeded. Like, yay. So, you know, it has... It has all of those great story elements.
The thing I love about the so what is that when I think about you know, the sorts of different stages of research that you read and people that you see, there are infinite numbers of gaps in the literature or in our knowledge of what's going on in the universe. There are so many different things, and so you see some people say, well, no one has done this before, therefore I'm going to do it. And it's like, no one has done it before is one part of that. You know, there are so many things we could do. We need to do stuff that is important, valuable, useful. There's got to be some other reason just beyond the fact that no one has done it before. We need to find that.
Yeah.
So what?
Absolutely. And it might be, you know, this is something which is going to make life better, be it for an entire population or from people who are suffering a particular illness, like maybe very, very rare illness. But it's just, the more we know and the more we understand, the better our chances of being able to translate that into other areas. So yeah, I think there's all this, you know, you need to have a reason why you're doing things.
When you've told scientists about this, when you've told scientists to distill their message from fresh fish sold here today down to fish, how do they cope with that?
Ironically, this sort of comes back to one of your first questions, really, really well until they get to their own work. So it's never fails to amaze me. You can get them to write like about their own research, and you get the group giving feedback, and they can pick out exactly what needs to be done, or even when they're talking about their work, they can give the most brilliant critique to everybody else, and they're bang on the money. They know precisely what has to be done. Then it's their turn, and they make every single mistake they have just picked up out of everybody else. So it's almost like you need to have this out-of-body experience to actually really focus in on your own work.
I mean, where does that come from? Is that, you know, the best people to explain something is someone who's only just learnt it, as opposed to the professors. You know, the professors have learnt it for 50 years, and it's very hard for them to separate out. Or maybe they've got all of the values of that field, they've got all of the details, and they want you to know about this bit and that bit and the other. God, it is a difficult challenge, though, to flip from seeing that critique in other people's work, but then putting it into your own work.
Yeah, I still remember it was one of the first workshops that I ever did. It was like with PhD students, and I remember asking an astrophysicist student, you know, so what are you working on right now? He said, well, to tell you that, I'll have to take you back to first principles. No, you really don't. Really, please. So it's like, I don't need the entire thing. You just need that hook. Like, get them interested there and then you can give them everything else. But, you know, don't lead with the Brussels sprouts. Give them something fun to eat first, and then they can eat their vegetables.
But is there an emotional need there that he is pushing, that he wants to show you how hard he's worked? He's not actually interested in demonstrating to you what he's learned. He's more showing, I have learned this giant all of this textbook, so I'm going to have to take you through from page 1 to page 7,000, and what you're going to be bamboozled by is how much knowledge there is. You won't learn anything, and I don't care about that. I just want to give you all of my knowledge. Is that it?
I don't know. We need a psychology person in here.
Maybe.
I think it comes down to your identity and how much your work defines you as an individual, or any of those things. For some people, it really is. I need to tell you how much I know, because that's how I express my confidence, or that's how I can feel better about who I am in this field.
I'm going to psychoanalyze without a license again, and I'm not
Perfect.
not psychoanalyzing you. I'm psychoanalyzing our good friends, the scientists. That there is a danger in public communication or clear communication of your work. If you can go out there and tell people clearly, simply what the so what is, then for some people that's great. That's cool. My so what is I am curing cancer, developing something that'll take us to the moon, I'm solving COVID, or I'm doing this thing. I got this thing I'm doing that, maybe my so what is not that big.
Yeah.
And that's kind of rough, that there are times when being clear about our work might expose it to ourselves as something that is actually not the most impactful thing in the universe.
Well, look, I was looking at the grazing habits of intertidal snails and what that did to. That's not going to change the world.
No.
But
no.
I think it's science is almost, now I'm really waxing lyrical, it's almost like it's made up of an entire bunch of pixels.
Yeah.
Every single little bit contributes to that whole broader picture. Sometimes you are looking at one tiny little coloured dot, but it's not until you step back and look at an entire discipline that you can see how all of those dots come together to make the whole picture. Wow, that's deep.
There you go. You're so much more generous to. No, I want to be generous to those people, but I think that's a nice way of framing that response. But I think underpinning a lot of scientists' fear about that we've got to go back to first principles is that if you do understand it clearly, then you probably either won't think very much of it, or you won't like it. So that's got to motivate a lot of scientists' work here.
Possibly. And I think there's a flip side to that as well. Like even just the act of talking about your work publicly, as soon as you are visible, you are vulnerable.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because then you're inviting criticism yet again. And it may have absolutely nothing to do with your work.
This is one of the things that I know in our workshop when we run these distilling sorts of activities, that it can be a bit of an emotional exercise for scientists because it exposes that vulnerability.
Absolutely.
Should vulnerability be a part of science communication?
Absolutely. Yeah. That gets down to that emotional appeal. It's bringing the human into the science and, show your motivation, show your passion, show your anger. Keep it controlled, obviously. Don't get up there ranting and throwing things, but...
Unless you want to.
Be authentic.
But still probably don't.
Yeah.
There's some forms of authenticity you should keep, locked away. Just some forms.
Otherwise you'll be notorious. But I think, bringing emotion into it, showing, let your enthusiasm for a topic come through. Or, be that, I realise dung beetles aren't everybody's cup of tea, but I like them.
Yeah.
Just don't be afraid to be your true self. And I think people can spot a fake.
Yep.
If you're up there and you're trying to be someone you're not, then that's going to come across as well. So it's a bit of a minefield when you actually start talking about it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But once you do open that vulnerability and you do open that chance of failure and expose your reasons for being there, you could be critiqued, but it's the only way you're actually going to cut through. You can sit there in safety and read out the most precise words that will say truthfully, what is going on in the science. But no one listens, no one engages, no one cares, and you're safe. So the only way to actually connect is to be vulnerable and be open to that sort of failure.
Yep. And so it's being true to yourself and don't bore for your country. Keep it concise.
Keep it concise. Thanks, Merryn.
Pleasure.